like to start off by telling you about Natalie. Natalie's a student at Brown, and I'm just going to run you through a day in the life because I think it helps you understand what I want to talk about tonight. In the morning, she wakes up, and in her email, she sees a note from a friend telling her to read an article from the New York Times the day before, looking at the intersection between immigrant policies and health outcomes. After reading the article, she gets on the bus and she goes to Hasbro Children's Hospital, where she's a volunteer for Health Leads. Health Leads is an organization, in case you don't know, that uses college students in hospitals to help patients and their families connect with vital health resources in the community. After her shift, she sits down and has some lunch and reads an article that her professor, her thesis advisor, just published in the Journal of Pediatrics about learning language development studied through premature babies in the neonatal ward. And then after that, she goes to the School of Public Health, where she's a participant in TriLab and works with her project team on a project around healthy early childhood development. So you see, Natalie has constructed her entire education at Brown, inside the classroom, outside the classroom, through the lens, and to realize her passion and interest in health inequalities. When my friends at AshokaU asked me to speak to you today about social entrepreneurship education, I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going to talk about. But when I started thinking about what I knew and what I believed and what I've seen happen in my time at Brown, I realized that my observations had more to do with higher education more generally, that by making small but very important changes in the things that we're all doing today, that we could actually make a huge difference in outcomes for students. The title of my talk, Recentering Higher Education, was inspired by an article I recently read by Randy Bass, an associate provost at Georgetown University, in which he talks about a post-course era. He's not talking about getting rid of the curriculum, but rather what he's talking about is elevating the importance and relevance of extracurriculars and other high-impact practices to take their rightful place alongside the formal curriculum where they can have a lot of impact. I want to warn you that what I'm about to tell you isn't revolutionary. It's not going to sound, it may not, and maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but it's not going to sound that complicated and maybe not that fancy, but it's actually a lot of small but important changes that we should be making, that by better integrating the pieces of education, we can have a huge impact. What I'm showing you now is a diagram that represents the model of higher education as we know it on our campuses, with a big bubble in the middle representing the formal curriculum, and with these other elements around the edges that are connected but not integrated. What I'm recommending is a shift toward the center for extracurriculars, for problem-based learning, and the passion and interest of our students. And that when we do that, we'll create a strong network of integrated pieces that will really supercharge our students' education. At a very concrete level, this type of education is designed from the very best ideas about of teaching and learning, and provides students with the knowledge, the experience, and the networks that they need to succeed after college. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes telling you what an education structured this way looks like. And I'm going to start with extracurriculars because that's where I've spent the majority of my time at Brown and where I've seen amazing results. When I came to Brown 7 years ago, working with social entrepreneurs, I saw my work through the lens of venture development and measured success by venture growth and success. But what I've come to understand is that venture development and many other extracurriculars have the potential for big impacts, but only when we pay attention to the fine details and we treat them like learning experiences. Sorry for this slide, there's a lot on there, but you don't need to really read it. I've been thinking about entrepreneurship as a learning experience for some time, but I'd never done, or our team had never done, any formal assessment using any specific rubrics until the efforts of two of my team members collided. Our communications manager was collecting stories like those of Hans and Scott for publication on our website and other media. And Lizzie Pollack, our assistant director, was planning a learning outcomes study for the entrepreneurial program in our fellowship. And she was planning to use the value rubrics developed by AAC and U to measure learning outcomes, but she needed data. And it turned out, we realized that the data that we had collected, that the stories we had collected, represented a rich data source that we could mine for indications of whether our theory about entrepreneurial education was actually happening. And when we matched the transcripts of those stories to the rubric that we had in front of us, we saw tremendous evidence of high-level achievement in many areas of these rubrics: critical thinking, creativity, communication skills, and many others. And as I step back from my work in entrepreneurship and venture support, I started to notice that other programs had made subtle but very important changes in the way that they constructed their programs and were having extraordinary results. So last summer, a colleague of mine at the Swearer Center launched a new internship program called iProv that placed 25 students across Providence in nonprofit and government positions. Doesn't sound that innovative, but unless you look below the surface at the fine details. The fine details reveal that iProv was constructed as a cohort so that the entrepreneurs were able to go beyond their individual experiences and draw connection and understand the interconnectedness of our community through the learning community that we formed. And we did it very simply. We did it by having weekly training sessions. We had them live together in dorms. But through that whole experience, they were able to draw connections that otherwise would not have been visible. So to illustrate, Vera was working at Olneyville Housing, and she was collecting oral histories from residents that were impacted by the foreclosure process. And through the learning communities, through her residential experience, through these trainings, she was able to interact with other people in the cohort. For example, Josh, who was working at the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, where he was advocating for policies to make affordable housing more accessible. See, that's what happens when you think you want to look at your slides. So now I'm going to shift and talk about problems and moving them toward the center of the education as well. It's widely understood that problem-based learning is more effective. And we're doing it in some ways, but maybe, in my opinion, not enough. So we have courses that connect theory and practice through community-based work or service learning. We have capstones increasingly that are giving students an opportunity to integrate and synthesize their learning. But we need to go further. We need to help students seek courses and connect those courses and their learning pathways with extracurriculars like research and internships so that they can deepen their understanding through multiple disciplines and different ways of thinking. Again, my insight here was driven by the power of problem-based learning that I saw in our entrepreneurship support work. When entrepreneurs come and visit me for a coaching session, I always start the session by asking them to tell me about their work. And I started to notice that students who started by telling me about their solution were almost always talking about a weaker idea than people who started by telling me about the problem that they were trying to solve and the opportunities that they saw for impact. So I used to use this chart, or I still use this chart, that maps the design thinking process developed by IDEO to suggest to students that they go back to the beginning and start focusing more of their attention on research and understanding the problem or context before developing their solution, which should occur much later in the process. And for entrepreneurs who are passionate and visionary about their problem and their dedication for a solution, what I see them do is move that venture to the center of their education, where they are deepening their understanding and knowledge of context, and then applying that knowledge to inform the continuous innovation process in their venture. But this model of learning runs counter to the structure of our university, where we're structured by academic disciplines. We have majors in psychology, we have majors in English and sociology, but we're not majoring in problems, but those are the way that students are interacting in the world. And so what we need to do is help them find a way to connect their learning in the way that's most relevant to them. So I'm going to illustrate by telling you about Brett, who is passionate about the environment, concerned about climate change, and really interested to develop tools so that he can develop solutions in his life. And so he's developed a course of study at Brown that goes across 8 different departments with 12 different courses that are looking at the science of climate. He's looking at the economics of climate. He's looking at how climate can affect cities, at the political process and how that might interact. And then he's looking at toolkit courses like social entrepreneurship, philanthropy, and policy to develop additional lenses for his studies. But to do this well requires a significant change in the way we work and leads me naturally to the next shift that I'm recommending to focus on the students themselves. It may seem obvious, but this shift is the most important and profound because when students when students discover their passion and align their studies around their interests and inherent strengths, we can then guide them to make smart choices that can bring their education alive. The problem is, to do this requires a complete change in the way we advise students. I think advising stops short when it focuses on helping students select courses to fill concentration requirements, when what's needed, as one student recently told me, is someone to help me figure out my life. And that requires a different kind of advising. Instead of transactional advising where we're choosing courses, we need to focus on relationships. We need to get to know students. And when we can do that, and when we do that well, we have amazing results. At first, I thought this was a very difficult problem to solve until I started thinking about an abundant resource on many of our campuses. In our work, we have created many roles for alumni to play very important roles. They speak in classes. This panel, we're speaking at a career fair. They are mentors to our fellowship, and they are providing access to their networks, whether it's in their venture, for their careers, for many different purposes. And we have an amazing problem, not such a terrible one, I have to admit, that we now have more alumni asking for opportunities to connect with our students than opportunities that we can fill. And that's a great problem to have, but the only reason that we have it is because we've dedicated the resources to make sure that we steward those relationships with amazing results. So it's expensive to do, but it's far less expensive than failing our students or trying to do it with staff on our campus. To illustrate, I'm going to talk about Natasha, who was a star fellow in the summer of 2013 and had a venture where she was going to go and work with a South African NGO that wanted to utilize college students as human capital in an existing program that was designed around an immersive summer experience. Through the fellowship, we introduced her, in this case, not even an alum, to Robin Pendeley, who runs Thinking Beyond Borders. And we introduced them because they shared this belief that immersive experience and cross-cultural understanding could have transformative impact in communities. And boy, were we right. I mean, these two formed not only a mentoring relationship, but a friendship that continues to this day. And because it's relational, because Robin was able to take the time to know Natasha and what she needed and what she could benefit from, was able to give her advice that was actionable and relevant because, in Natasha's word, it was given within the context of so much else that he knows about me. So, at the beginning of this talk, I said it wouldn't be complicated. I hope you understand that I'm talking about small but very important changes. And I hope that some of the examples that I've given make it real and accessible. These are not complicated changes, but they have the potential for transformative impact for our students. And when done correctly, these changes, I believe, can recharge the vitality and relevance of higher education and give us supercharged graduates that think critically, act creatively, and are ready to take on lives of impact. Thank you.